Welcome everyone to the 15th Honorary Patronage of the University Philosophical Society's 341st session. Before we bestow this award to Humza, I'd like to talk briefly about what the Phil endeavours to achieve and why I'm been nominated for this award today. For 341 years of history, the Phil has hosted some of the world's most preeminent thinkers, innovators, and business and academic leaders. These guests are members in the past who tracked from Samuel Beckett to Oscar Wilde to Bram Stoker across 341 years of history, and today we have 10,000 members tracking from all corners of the globe. Every year, the Council selects an elect number of individuals to the Society to receive a Gold Medal of Honorary Patronage on the basis of their contributions to discourse. Previous nominees include President Joe Biden, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Hosier, Nicholas Sturgeon, and a number of other nominees, Nobel laureates, and Oscar and Grammy Award winners. Today, the Society is delighted to award Phil's Gold Medal of Honorary Patronage to Humza Yousef on the basis of his contributions to political discourse. Humza's career spans over 2 decades across Scottish politics, initially getting involved in 2006 and being a Minister of the Scottish Parliament for over 15 years. He was First Minister of Scotland after serving in several cabinets, the likes of Alex Salmond and Nicholas Sturgeon, on a resurgent Scottish National Party through the 2000s and 2010s, and over the course of 2023 and 2024, led the country as the first elected Muslim leader of a Western nation and the first person of colour to lead Scotland in the nation's history. While his reign was admittedly perhaps short-lived, according to several journalistic outreaches, his reign nonetheless spans a really significant time in Scottish history. His period has tracked a series of very important moments, from Scotland's handling of the COVID-19 crisis to, of course, the independence referendum in 2014. And while Humza's reign is relatively short, he stands as a vocal voice for several different causes and has continued to be a long-lasting and prominent outspoken figure supporting Palestinian solidarity in the wake of Western nations' comparatively more contested stances. We're delighted to be awarding Humza with this award today, and we invite him to provide a brief address to the Society now. So we'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Liam, for that very kind address. The fact that you did that from memory, I don't think I did recount my life from memory in the way that you did. Thank you very much for that. The less emphasis on the short reign. No, it's a real pleasure to be here. I travelled from Edinburgh this morning, and I was commenting to Liam that it's not often that a Scotsman travels to a country, gets off a plane, and there's worse weather than back home. Thank you nonetheless for making me feel like I'm back at home. A real pleasure and a great honour to be here that you've bestowed upon me. So thank you to the President, to the members of the FIL, and my friends. It is a genuine honour to be in that company, that illustrious company that you mentioned in your introduction. I do feel like home, not just when I come to Ireland. I often feel like I'm coming home, not just because of the weather, but I must confess that in my constituency, my Glasgow constituency, in the south of Glasgow, I have a very notable and significant Scots-Irish community. Many of them have Irish heritage. Many of them are second, third, and fourth, even generation and more Scots-Irish. Though a lot of them come from slightly more north-west to Dublin, most of them from County Donegal. The excitement in my constituency is palpable whenever Daniel O'Donnell comes to church. Dublin and Glasgow are sister cities in more ways than one. We share humour, we share stubbornness, I would suggest. We share a love of great traditional music, of migration, and often even a mutual suspicion of London. Perhaps more importantly, we share a history of people that I think refuse to accept things that are placed upon them. And it's that famous quote by Charles Stuart Parnell goes, "No man has the right to fix the boundary of the march of a nation. No man has a right to say to his country, thus far shalt thou go, and no further." That spirit, I think, doesn't just apply to nations, or that it does, but also to institutions like Trinity, but also to people too. So founded in, as you know, 1592, Trinity has produced revolutionaries, it's produced reformers, Nobel laureates and presidents. It's housed giants of literature, as Lehman mentioned, like Bram Stoker, Oscar Wilde, political leaders that I admire very much, like Mary Robinson, as well as other illustrious figures throughout history. All of them who refused to accept the limits that were placed upon them. And of course, Trinity sits within a country whose history teaches us something very profound. That power is never permanent, injustice is never inevitable, and that leadership, at its best, can bend the arc of history. Slowly perhaps, but certainly decisively. So to be included in amongst those pantheon of awardees of the past, the likes of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, right the way through to a living legend like President Higgins, who I admire very much, is deeply humbling. So today, as opposed to speaking about myself, I thought this was a wonderful opportunity to possibly speak to the leaders of tomorrow. And by God, we need leaders of tomorrow, because the world is in a state of perma-crisis. We're living in an age of impunity, and your leadership, and may I suggest your moral clarity, is needed now more than ever before. Trust in public institutions, governments, and the very foundations of our democratic institutions is at a justifiably all-time low. Much of that self-inflicted. Just look at the horrors, and that is not a word strong enough actually to describe it, but the horrors of the Epstein scandal. A horrendously perfect example of how men with power, with money and influence often close rank to protect each other, and how those same individuals seek to destabilise the world for their own profit, my goodness, sometimes even for their own enjoyment. Given Epstein's link to the British establishment, from the House of Lords right the way through to members of the royal family, I would recall that the UK government must instruct a judge-led public inquiry into Jeffrey Epstein's links into the British establishment. Why? Because transparency is the antidote to secrecy and is an essential ingredient for that restoration of trust. But we also need new thinking. We need fresh ideas. We need those who don't come from the traditional backgrounds of those who often inhibit the powers of corridor. Corridors of power, that's the way to say it. We need them to come forward, whether that's in Westminster, Holyrood, or the Dáil. And so to all of you, particularly those who are students and younger students here, there is, I think, a weight of responsibility on your shoulders to step up. And so maybe I can offer you some reflections from somebody who spent 15 years in the front line of politics, 12 of those years in government, not too short a time, 12 of those years. You see, I didn't take that to heart. 12 years in government in a variety of different roles, including as First Minister of his nation, Scotland, the only country that I call home. So I promise you, no elder statesman attempt here, no lessons in perfection, as my political opponents will tell you. I've made my fair share of mistakes. For a full, comprehensive list of my mistakes, please refer to my wife. She has a detailed record, and amazingly can recite them from memory. But my very first piece of advice, I suppose I would give, reflecting on my own journey when I entered Parliament aged 26, was you should and you must believe in yourself. I know that sounds maybe pejorative and something you'd find on a gift card, but it is an important lesson, because as somebody who has interacted with presidents, with kings and queens, with prime ministers, with lords and ladies, over the years, I can tell you they have no superhuman qualities that you do not and cannot possess. And trust me, you will be told repeatedly, when it comes to your ascent to leadership, that you are not ready, that you're too young, you're too different, you're too outspoken. I was told I was the wrong colour, the wrong faith, I had the wrong name. And I've taken each of those reasons, why I've been chosen, not why I'm not good enough in life, as a challenge that I was determined to overcome. I'm becoming the first Muslim leader of a Western democratic nation, the youngest First Minister in the history of Scottish devolution, and the first person of colour in the Scottish Government. I think in some way I managed to prove those doubters wrong. But don't confuse what I'm saying for arrogance. As John Wooden, who's possibly the greatest US college basketball coach, one of the best managers of men, other than, of course, Jock Stein at Celtic, John Wooden said, talent is God-given, be humble. Fame is man-given, be thankful. Conceit is self-given, be careful. So I simply mean to say that we're not necessarily better than anyone else, but you're certainly just as damn good, and assure nobody ever lets you believe otherwise. The leaders of tomorrow must be, in this world, to use a Glasgow word, gallus, and you must take your place at the table. Because if you don't believe you belong, trust me, somebody else will gladly take your seat. And that perhaps takes me to my second piece of advice, which is perhaps one of the most important lessons. And if I could give you one thing to take away from today's address, it would probably be this: that hold fast to your values, even, perhaps especially, when it may cost you. You see, we live in a time when politics and principles can feel very transactional. Positions are adjusted according to the latest polling, convictions bend under pressure, principles become simple, optional extras. Too many leaders belong to what I often call the Groucho Marx school of politics. These are my principles. If you don't like them, don't worry, I have others. But leadership without values is not leadership at all. Look at the world around us. The international order that helped to shape the post-war era is on the brink of collapse if it hasn't dismantled, frankly, altogether. Institutions that were designed to prevent catastrophe are now obsolete, they're toothless, they're impotent. War crimes are committed with absolute impunity. Just take Gaza, where tens of thousands have been killed. Children brutally murdered in front of our eyes. Hospitals attacked, entire families and lineages wiped out. A genocide being live-streamed on our mobile phones. That should be a stain, frankly, on our collective conscience, that we failed to put a stop to the murder of tens of thousands of innocent people. And when our children and our future generations inevitably study this horrific chapter in our history books, they should never ever forgive those who were silent, let alone those who were complicit. So the question for you, the leaders of tomorrow, is this: when the pressure comes, and it will you stand by your principles, even if that means that you stand alone? Days after October the 7th, as First Minister, I called for a ceasefire. It wasn't popular. No other European leader at that point had made that call. In fact, they were saying quite the opposite. There must not be a ceasefire. But I believed then, as I believe now, that the collective punishment, the killing of civilians, the destruction of entire neighbourhoods, can never ever be justified. Leadership is not always about being comfortable. It is, though, about being anchored in your values. And that perhaps is a good segue to the third piece of advice that I have for you. As we know, populism is rising across countries and continents. Populism, by very nature, offers very simple solutions to very complex problems. Blame migrants, blame minorities, blame other for the social ills that we're facing. No blacks, no Irish, no dogs. Populism thrives on outrage, and I'm afraid in the modern day, increasingly on the algorithm. But leaders of tomorrow must resist the temptation of offering those simple solutions to very complex problems. It's fair to say that Dublin faces an acute housing crisis. I don't have to tell the young people here who are living through that. It's very much the same across the UK. But for decades now, Westminster politicians have blamed the housing crisis in the UK on migrants, while conveniently overlooking the political choices that they've made. For example, the disastrous right to buy scheme was introduced by Margaret Thatcher, which sold up millions and millions of social housing stock without replacing one for one. It isn't the migrant that's taken the house off you, it's the politician. And it's the same whenever we face economic stagnation. It's not because of a single group or a convenient scapegoat. It's because leadership failed to invest, to plan, or to think long term. So my plea to you is to resist the dopamine urge of easy applause. And we've all been there, we've all been guilty of it for those that are in political positions of leadership. But often it is a much greater reward in choosing the harder path, as complex as it often can be. So even if you're the only one prepared to do so, resist that temptation of populism. The very least we can do is have the courage of our convictions. Now, on a slightly lighter note, talking of convictions of a different nature, let's talk about President Trump. The president, that'll get me not, I'll not be allowed back in the United States. It's terrible that Scotland have just qualified for the World Cup in 2018. Miserable years and I have a flight to Boston to catch. The president has often been criticised for playing too much golf, or not for starting his first meetings until 11 a.m. So I'm going to do something that I've never done in my life, first here at Trinity College, and defend President Trump. In truth, I have no idea what I was doing before 11 o'clock. I don't think I necessarily want to know. But for any leader, particularly one who has access to nuclear codes, setting your boundaries and ensuring proper work-life balance is actually quite important. And here perhaps lies the next piece of advice I convey to you from my own lived experience. Don't become a workaholic. Anything aholic is not good. And that includes work. If you show me a workaholic, I'll show you someone who doesn't know their priorities. You see, because if you're working 24/7, never taking a break, sleeping only a few hours a day, your mind constantly in overdrive, and your stress levels through the roof, then trust me, you are never going to be the best version of yourself. Your decision making becomes increasingly erratic, your judgment clouded, and you'll sacrifice the very relationships you need in order to keep us human. Trust me, I know. My name is Humza Yousef, and I'm a recovering workaholic. You see, when I entered Parliament at age 26, one of the youngest members of Parliament in the Holyrood Chamber to be elected, one of only two members of the Scottish Parliament that were people of colour, I thought the only way to prove myself and the only way to get ahead was to throw myself entirely into it at the expense of everything and everyone else. I burned both ends of it, the red candle, became distant from friends, became distant from family. Even when I was present, I wasn't actually present. I was always thinking about work. In 2016, I was transport minister. My personal life was a mess because I hadn't drawn those boundaries. Professionally, it's fair to say, I was also going through some challenges at the time. And then one day, it all came to an end. I had a breakdown. My mental health imploded. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell my closest colleagues. Too ashamed to tell the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, at the time. I was worrying, wrongly of course, that she would think I wasn't up to the job because of my mental health troubles. Eventually, when it reached absolute crisis, I sought help. I got counselling. And it's one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. And there's been many fantastic lessons and strategies that my counsellor has offered me over the years. But the best is to try to take a moment each and every day to remember what is really important in life. And it is just that. Life. Don't live to work, work to live. To help you do that, make sure that whatever you do next, I'm sure it will be great and good things. Set your boundaries from the very beginning. Protect what is most important to you. Invest your time, your energy, your effort, and your emotions in the people that you love. You see, there's not a single person that has passed through life in the 300,000 year history that we Homo sapiens have been around, who on their deathbed wish that they spent an extra hour in the office, or wish that they spent more time on their emails, or wish that they recorded one more piece of content for the gram. They probably regret not spending more time with their children, with their parents, or maybe their partners. So yes, work hard, work your proverbial socks off, but set your boundaries. Trust me, investing time in yourself and those that you love makes you a much better student, a much better employee, a much better employer, a better head of government, a better cabinet minister, but most importantly, it makes you a much better human being. Leadership is not about perfection. As that famous Dubliner, whose birthday I understand is celebrated this week, James Joyce puts it, to live, to err, to fall, to triumph. So friends, throughout life's journey, which I'm very grateful to still be on, I've been blessed to learn many lessons along the way, and I'm very much still learning. So hopefully there has been something within my contribution that will help you in life, and if so, pass it on to another. It's never any use keeping good advice to yourself. So once again, to the President, to the members of the Royal Society Council, to the Society more generally, thank you for the great honour that you bestowed upon me. Thank you for your indulgence this afternoon, and really it has been an honour to address you. I look forward to your interrogation shortly, Liam, and from the question and answers from those assembled here as well. Thank you. Good everyone.
Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for that wonderful speech. I'd like to, all of us will have some questions ready shortly after I ask a few questions here, and hopefully those questions are addressing the current political conditions that you outlined in that speech. But I think I'd like to start personally, maybe tackle the past, present, and future. I mean, you talked about, in your address there, your insistence on forming strong values and sticking to those principles throughout your career. And I think that's something that I'm sure many politicians aspire to, and many fail. And you started as a parliamentary assistant in the Bashar Ahmad, and then continued to work under Salmon and Sturgeon before rising to this position. What were your initial influences that sort of shapes your desire to hold strong to those values? And have those influences changed over time as your career has developed?
Yeah, what a wonderful question. And before the lections can slightly in the way of those that are sitting over there, but I'll do my best to address all sides of the room. Look, first of all, let me, of course, be honest and frank. In politics, much like in life, you also have to find your areas of compromise. What you must do, though, is have a grounding. And you're at this a lot of you are at this wonderful stage of life where you're being challenged about the way that you think. You know, when I went into university, I was a member of Glasgow University, a student of Glasgow University, and I thought, even at that age, when I started university, and certainly throughout my course, that I knew right from wrong. I had a real sense of moral clarity. I was part of the Stop the War movement. It was 2003, the Iraq War was ongoing, and of course I still believe that was an illegal invasion that the UK should have no part in, and it upsets me greatly, it sickens me in fact, that the architect and the leader of that invasion from the UK perspective is now heading a so-called Board of Peace in Gaza, but I'll put that aside for a minute. But my values were also challenged. A lot of my values were challenged, but what I thought was right and wrong were shaped in university, challenged in university. I think as long as you have a grounding, you have those red lines in the sand, you have those lines in the sand that you will never compromise on. And all those other areas, you've got to be able to, in life, find compromise. That's how communities come together, because they find compromise. They disagree agreeably, but they find a way of compromising, and that now is being fractured. Influences, huge influences, like my parents and my mum in particular, though my dad was the more outwardly political. My mother was a great believer in standing up for yourself. Not to give you the full kind of long story, but my mother, when I was young in primary school, she and my father wanted to move to the suburbs. They lived in Glasgow, and she wanted to move out to the suburbs, nice leafy suburbs of Newton Mearns. And they found a house. It wasn't like the old days when you had the internet, of course. It was the old magazines and the estate agents you would look through. And they found a house that they wanted to go view, and every time my mum went to make the phone call and gave her name, they would say all the owners of the houses away on holiday, or they're washing their hair, or they're fluffing the cat, or whatever they're doing, to make an excuse. And 3 or 4 weeks passed, and my mum got that feeling that anybody who's ever been discriminated, particularly people of colour, we have that feeling in our gut that there's something else going on. And so she said to my dad, I'm telling you, we're not being allowed to see this house because we're Asian. And so I want you to get Margaret, who was my dad's secretary, to phone up and ask for an appointment. So mum phoned up, got the same excuse. Half an hour later, Margaret phoned up, she got an appointment like that. And they repeated the experiment 2 or 3 times. Asian name, a Scottish white person, and of course the Scottish white person got an appointment. The Asian person didn't. Mum then took them to court, the estate agent. Eventually won. It was not all easy going, but she won. And this was despite even people in our own community saying, just let it go. Just drop it. Don't, like, this is our host country. It's their right to say who should see their houses and not. Don't put the spotlight on us. It's just not good for us. Just let it go. And she did. And I remember years later, we got hate mail through the door. I remember it coming through the door, and at school I got teased about it, and mum and dad got abuse, and things said at the supermarket. I remember saying to my mum years and years later, how come you didn't just let it go? I'm pleased you didn't. That pressure must have been pretty immense. Why did you not let it go? And she said, honestly, if I let that go today, they'll roll over you tomorrow. And that was one of the most important lessons. So for all the political influences, and I admired great people and read their biographies and been inspired by the likes of Nelson Mandela and Malcolm X and closer to home, Michael Collins and many James Connolly and many others over the years. But I would say my mother's influence over me has been huge.
Thank you for that. I think that you've sort of really outlined a quite fundamental trade-off, which is not only explicit for any given politician, but also, I suppose, particular to the Scottish experience in the last few decades, and that is the trade-off with the sort of long-term existential goal of probably the SNP for Scottish independence, the sort of core value that we're striving towards, and then also current events that are on the basis of progressive causes. I think of gender reformation, a gender reform bill a few years ago, and I think of the work on climate action. And those tasks require an immense amount of moderation and compromise. Yeah. And I suppose it'd be interesting to hear what value you think stands out as being more important, or has been more important over the course of your career. That emphasis on holding to those values, or having the ability to meet somebody at the table and find them halfway.
Yeah, and again, look, crossing the border into Northern Ireland, which has been, hugely seminal in shaping my interest in politics. Who of us would have ever believed that we'd see in Stormont the Reverend Ian Paisley and Mark McGuinness sitting down, shaking hands, almost having a kind of Chuckle Brothers double team. And that's no disrespect to them. I think both of them colossal political figures, and I got along particularly well with Martin over the years. And so to me, if there ever was an example of that need to compromise for the greater good, then that was it. But I don't see the strive for Scottish independence and progressive values like climate action, or indeed the issue around gender recognition for those who are transgender. I don't see them as competing values. I think when it comes to striving for Scottish independence, which I still do, then showing people what kind of nation we want to be is really important. With the limited powers of devolution, if we can show people what kind of country we want to be, what kind of society we want to create, what our values are as a nation, then hopefully that would give them a level of confidence that, well, if that's what they strive to do with the powers they have under devolution, we'll think about the nation we could be if we had the full powers of a normal, independent country. And when I think about the global stage, I do look at countries like Ireland And you'll have disagreements, of course, with the government's position in relation to international affairs, but I think about leadership. Countries like Ireland, like Norway, and others have played relatively small populations, not dissimilar to Scotland's size, but showing real moral clarity on the global stage when at a time when we've seen such a lack of it, I think is really important. So I see the two being interlinked. Our values at home, at a domestic, devolved setting, are very important to inform what kind of nation we're going to be when we become an independent nation.
I think you've gotten onto a really interesting thing in relation to not only Scotland's connection to Ireland, but also I think on a personal level there's a lot of similarities in the experience of someone like you, along with many other Irish leaders we've had in recent history, joining parties on the rise over the course of the noughties, and then entering into sort of the top positions in politics around or before the age of 40, and then also leaving those positions very early. I don't know, I suppose I'm interested in asking if you notice any similarities in what feels like a faster political life cycle at the personal level, and whether you think there's anything that you've taken from these different people's experiences and tried to adopt yourself.
Yeah, look, it's really interesting. Do you know, the time I was in a position as First Minister, there was a very brief period where the leader, the head of the UK government, Scottish government, Welsh government, Northern Irish government, and the Taoiseach, Leo at the time, none of us were white men. There was not a single white male in power at the head of government. It was only a very brief period, and it changed. Von Geffen, poor guy, was only in position for like 6 weeks, but it was a very short period. But there was a period. Incredible. And what I always say to my British colleagues is, you guys have spent 2-3 decades denigrating multiculturalism, denigrating immigration, but actually you've got such a wonderful blueprint. You know, I couldn't be further apart from Rishi Sunak's political position. But the fact of the matter is, you have not seen in most of Western Europe a brown man rise to the highest level of office, and not any office, you know, that of the British government. And of course, again, you've got Leo's example here in the public, in Ireland. But you've not had many examples in Western Europe of that. And instead of denigrating multiculturalism, you should say, well, we've got the blueprint in terms of how we do it and do it well, so that you can have a brown Home Secretary, or you can have a Muslim First Minister, or you can have a mayor like Sadiq Khan in one of the most important capital cities in the world that's Muslim, and there's no compromise between his faith, his culture, and who we are as a nation, or in London's case, as a city. But in terms of the fast-paced nature of politics as we see it, this is why I'm so keen to encourage young people to get involved in politics. You know, it's far too often been the domain of the older white male that has been privileged. Not every white male, I mean, not the working class or those that haven't had privilege, but certainly the privileged. And again, I refer back to the Epstein scandal, where those, and they weren't all white men, but predominantly privileged men who were closing ranks to protect each other and using the most awful abuse of women and very young girls in order to satisfy themselves and discard them as though they were not even property, but discard them as they were simply not worth anything more than the filth and missions. And that is a story as old as time, and yet such protectionism has entered into the very heart of the British establishment. And so it's really important that young people in particular, people from different backgrounds, that gives us that plurality of thought, so important that you engage in the political process, and you yourself have the ambition to be heading government, and to be leading civil service, and to be key advisors, and not to think that that's somebody else's job. And by the way, this is particularly, I would say, for the women in the audience today, because so my wife is a local city councillor, and she's just become, I'm very proud to be Deputy Lord Provost, effectively Deputy Mayor of our small city in Dundee. But you know, and we've got 3 beautiful children, and we love them to bits, so I'll caveat that before I about to say what I'm about to say. Love my children to bits, absolutely adore them. But there's simply no doubt that if she didn't have those 3 children, her career would have been way ahead of where it was. And she's doing well for herself, of course, and advancing professionally. But many studies out there show just how far back women are held when it comes to the current constructs of patriarchy that still exist today. So, if I give me a very long answer to a very short question, but yes, politics is fast-paced, fast-moving. The spaces we inhabit now are filled with disinformation. It's a very difficult job. There's a lot of stresses that are placed on you. There's abuse that comes at you from all angles. But, and the big but, there is massive opportunity and transformational change to be made. And if you're not leading that transformational change, somebody else is going to lead it for you, and you're going to have zero say in it, or virtually zero say in it.
I think I'll take on one point you made there about sort of standing up for your faith, and then we'll pass on to the island. Since being your post, you've gone on to be a very outspoken and continue to be a very outspoken voice against the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Just last week, you led a call to help divest from Scottish oil fields that were sending funds onto the Israeli state. And you've continued to be a very outspoken voice against the anti-immigration and Islamophobic riots that have been occurring in the UK over the last few years. And I suppose my question is regarding how your position is developed and why you still hold massive political significance and a large figure in the media. What you see your role is, and perhaps then what you see the role of young people is, in helping combat these clearly growing issues as they become more overt and more bigoted, and how you see your role, be it as an outspoken member of the media or as a figure that will continue to remain in politics over the next few decades.
Yeah, no, listen, thanks again. That's a really insightful and acute kind of observation. Look, I come from in some respects, from a faith background, so I'm very proud to be Muslim and never shied away from my Islamic faith. People come from it from a different belief or set of values, but for me, from a faith perspective, my belief is that everything that I've gained in life, every political position, cabinet minister, head of the government, junior minister, whatever that position was, has been given to me as a responsibility from God. And it's a weight on my shoulders that I feel really heavy. And the fact that I'm out of office and have been, for a period now, almost 2 years. The amazing thing about being a head of government, whether you're Taoiseach here in Ireland or whether you're head of First Minister, Prime Minister, President, is that you carry the former title for your whole life. So I'll always be former First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousef. And I'll go on to do other things, but I'll always be a former First Minister. And with that comes a real responsibility, that my words carry weight. And, I don't comment on every single issue that is happening under the sun, although we release a lot of content on topical issues. But I try to make my contributions impactful on issues of the day. And for me, I'm deeply worried about the rise of far-right populism in our world. And of course injustices like Gaza, but to me they're completely interlinked. And how are they interlinked? Well, think about the genocide in Gaza. And the question that's asked after any genocide, whether it's something as awful as the Holocaust, whether it's Rwanda, Bosnia, or indeed Gaza, in the aftermath, sociologists and others always ask themselves the same question. They always ask themselves, how can human beings be so cruel to their fellow human beings? And the answer, inevitably, is always the same. Because of dehumanization. Because you're able to dehumanize the Tutsi, or the Bosnian Muslim, or the Palestinian, then you were able to perform the mental gymnastics that must be required in order to justify the brutal killing of children, for example. And the far right operates in exactly the same way. The reason that they can justify the hateful rhetoric, the killing, the assault, of people who are different. In this case, it's Muslims that are in the crossfire, it's migrants. Well, it's the wrong type of migrant. There's no problem with Ukrainian refugees, but it's the, and by the way, I support giving Ukrainian sanctuary in our countries, but it's the wrong type of migrant that's in the crosshair. The reason they can do that is because they've dehumanised those people. And so I think it's really important that whatever platform we're given, and it may be as president of the Phil Society, maybe as a former head of government, maybe as a current head of government, that platform is used. Otherwise, the privilege which you've been bestowed, you're wasting.
Thank you very much for that. I think we'll open it to the audience for questions now. Go on.
Do tell me your name as well, by the way.
First of all, thank you so much for being here. Back in your time in college, I think you worked with the National Muslim Students Association and you worked a lot with Islamic youth. How did these experiences shape you in the UK?
Okay. What was your name? Tamim? Tamim Tamam. Good. No, I'm saying Tamam. It was a joke, if you got the Arabic language. It very clearly fell flat. Tamim Tamam. Right, I'll take two at a time. There's another, just somebody right beside you. Yes, please.
Oh, sorry. I'm about the far right, and in the recent Epstein scandal revealed that the far right was kind of started by Epstein ban as a means to basically create like a right-wing, tribalised thing to basically weaken government powers and have more influence over the right-wing movements, like, Nigel Farage tried to ban Nigel Farage being connected to Russia, as well as the fact these files also show even more corruption between capital, such as how Epstein recommended Palantir to Root Rock, which is the pedophiles surveillance company which is being used to perpetuate genocide in Gaza, also which the same company is also being integrated to get NHS data. So the question I want to ask you is, like, how do you think there should be more security to stop outside influence in UK democracy, as how the Brexit movement was created influenced by Epstein, as well as how these corporations such as Gaza basically use their influence parties to basically achieve their needs, achieve power and weaken democracy through surveillance?
Oh, great question. Before I do that, who has a pen that works?
I have a pen.
Wonderful.
I have several pens.
Thank you. Thank you, man of several pens, because mine has decided not to. Oh, several! I'll just take one.
I get, they're free in the takeaway, I guess.
Yeah. A ninja sushi pen. Very good, very good, very good. Thank you very much.
It doesn't work out like more of that.
No, it works. And what was your name? Nutrachi. Not. Okay, I'll try and be very quick in my answer. I'll go for Tamim's question first, and then I'll come back to yours. So look, as I mentioned before, faith for me is really important. It's who I am, it's part of my identity, it's what I'm grounded in. But I don't want that to come across as suggesting that you've got to be a person of faith to have values. Of course you don't. You can be grounded in whatever values you were brought up in. They can be secular, they can be atheist, agnostic, of course people of faith. But it was always very important to me to be true to who I was. So when I was growing up and we had Tony Blair as Prime Minister, it was his advisor, now podcast host Alistair Campbell, who once stepped in an interview and said Tony doesn't do God, right? To the interviewer who asked him about his own faith. And I've always thought, if you do God, as I do, then you should really be upfront. Like, why pretend otherwise? But what I've always, and this was part of the election campaign or selection campaign to be First Minister, as it became quite a live issue, not actually because of my faith, but the faith of my opponent, who was part of what we call the Wee Free Church, the Free Church in Scotland, quite a conservative denomination in Scotland. Is that I don't legislate on the basis of my faith. So my faith is important to me, but it's not the basis by which I legislate. The basis by which I legislate is understanding the arguments for and against any particular issue, understanding and making a judgment, therefore, of what I think is best for society. So, look, my Muslim upbringing, my mother always instilled we should be proud of who we are. And I say that to my own children. Look, they'll make their own choices as they grow up in terms of what they choose to do, what they choose to practice, what they choose to believe. But one of the things, if I give you an example, my 6-year-old Amal, I'm so delighted with her school. She's one of 3 Muslims in our primary 2 class, 6 years old, and they make a really big song and dance about the fact that there's Ramadan going on, as they do for Easter, and as they do for Christmas, and as they do for Hanukkah, and as they do for Diwali. And my daughter now, and we as the parents of those children, we make up party bags and make sure they've got enough party bags for all the kids when Ramadan starts, and Eid and sweets, and we make sure, but we want our kids to be proud of who they are. And I think when we're living in a society and at a time where there's forces on the right, the hard right and the far right, who are demanding assimilation, we should be standing up and saying that there's great strength in our plurality. And that our country and our continent can't survive without that plurality. Because trust me, if there's no migration coming to our countries collectively, where the birth rates are and have been dwindling, more so in the UK than I think in Ireland, and the population, the elder population is rising, actually more so in Ireland than even the UK, then this country and this continent cannot survive without people from the outside coming in. And we should embrace those cultures and those differences. On the second question, I just think such a really good, insightful observation about what's happening, because the forces of the far right, they're sharing funding. So I think about Tommy Robinson, agitator, provocateur, and frankly, I think often a traitor to his own country because of how cheaply he sells the United Kingdom. I don't say that lightly. He is somebody, when his last court case happened, and he's had several court cases over the years, remember he's a convicted thug. His last court case was funded, allegedly, according to him, by no other than Elon Musk. So the far right and the sympathisers of the far right are sharing funding, they're sharing resources, they're sharing talking points, they're sharing scripts. And so I'll let you come back on it. So the question is, how do you stop that subversion of your democracy? Well, this is where much stronger rules and regulations around campaign finance have to be there. In the UK, we're not as bad as the United States in fairness, but it's still pretty awful about how easily, and you saw that with Sir Keir Starmer and the mess he got himself into in the beginning of his premiership with donations from Lord Ali and the access that Lord Ali had. It's still open season, it's still pretty transactional. We had this ludicrous comment from the leader of the Reform Party in Scotland, a man you won't have heard of, but his name is Lord Offord, who was asked the question, were you given your peerage by the Conservatives because of your £150,000 donation? To which his answer was, of course not. How dare you suggest such a thing? But obviously, it's blatantly obvious to everybody that's the reason why. So much stronger campaign finances, but also I would say, for those that view themselves as progressive, as I do, if the problem is transatlantic, then the solution also has to be transatlantic and even transglobal as well. Did you want to come back in before I go to the questions?
It also kind of on the far right seems very unnatural, because it all seems very manufactured, because the European far right especially is very cookie cutter, it's always the same talking points. It's literally Erica first at the trying to say you said, oh, it's a grift kind of thing before you slip there. So it feels that the whole thing is it kind of feels the far right, these decisions are not natural, they kind of feel they're very artificially created, and also kind of emerge as a lack of hope, because I kind of feel the world's kind of position was, as it was in the 1920s after World War, where it was quite a stock price where people feel that democracy is better, and it's no hope for the future. I think the big issue in the UK, I think whole West to the West of the nihilism and things won't get any better.
Agreed.
But how racism can be a student technique to try to get out of it. I kind of feel that there needs to be, because I do agree with you that I feel that right-wing populism, that's for paragraph again, because we're not going to solve it and also, take it from billionaires. One of the reasons why I kind of...
Luke, do you have a question?
I just want to say, I also wish more people call the steps of, Mom Johnny and stuff, because I really was inspired by him, even though he may be Muslim immigrant, his policies are standards for him, which
hope. Yeah, look, again, I agree with the observation. The antidote to fear has got to be hope. So hope is a very, very strong motivator. We saw that in the Scottish independence referendum. They literally called the anti-independence campaign, quite literally dubbed themselves Project Fear. And that got leaked publicly, but they were calling themselves Project Fear. And so people are calling out for hope. So even in the UK context, although Reform are often leading the polls, look at the surge in the Green Party. Massive surge in the Green Party. Now, there's a by-election taking place in the UK shortly in Manchester, and the Greens and Reform are thought to be the two that are going to be competing, with Labour and Conservatives, distant third and fourth and fifth and so on. And Mamdani is a good example of that as well, where people are looking for hope and looking for aspirations. So what I often say to my UK colleagues and British colleagues is, don't try to out-Farage Nigel Farage, because you can't. You can't. So what you've got to do is present yourself as the very antidote to that and present something. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Please.
If you were in the government, like let's say that you're in the role of Keir Starmer, what practical steps would you be taking to kind of try and curb and then
Reform and their growth. Yeah. What was your name?
Cecilia?
Cecilia. How would you deal with reform? Have you got another hour for me to answer that? But yeah, please. There's some, just behind you as well.
So my name's Gwen.
Gwen?
Gwen.
Gwen.
Yeah. And I was just wondering, I think there was an interview you gave where you said that, of course, you stood by, the sort of value of trying to improve the lives of trans people, but that you, in hindsight, think that the self-ID and the approach to it that was taken was maybe the wrong way to go about that. So I was just wondering, especially after the Supreme Court ruling, what do you think is the right way to do that? What sort of, not necessarily that I want you to come up with a solution on the spot, but what general direction would you be moving in at this moment in time?
That's a great question. And there's maybe one that,
You talk about the rise of populism quite a lot today. In the past few years, have you, as a massive public, noticed an increase in the amount of negative backlash or harassment that you get as part of that?
Yeah. What was your name?
Ridgeway. R-I-D-V-I-K.
No, it's okay. I'm struggling to hear. Forgive me. The acoustics in this room are not going to say that. Look on. Celia's question about how to tackle reform and my advice to the Prime Minister. I suppose it goes back to what I said just a moment ago. You can't out-Farage Nigel Farage, so stop trying. The second thing I would say to him is, I suppose, the question from there was a look that present people a really a vision of hope. I think people are striving for, and I remember Labour came in with this massive landslide victory. A huge, I love this landslide, as it was often called, but a landslide nonetheless. They came in on a promise of change. And what's the first thing they began to do? They started taking the winter fuel allowance off the pensioners. They started cutting disability benefits. They refused to give a group of women, slightly older women called the WASPy women, their rightful claim to compensation because of how they were treated around the pensions. And while the economic case for some of that you might be able to make, right? You might be able to say, look, I've got to cut the welfare bill because of the state of the economy. When you come in with such a landslide and such goodwill from people who are wanting change, I think you've got to project some kind of hope and do things that will make them think, I can have a bit more trust in my politicians, as opposed to we vote them in. They do the things that they didn't tell us they were going to do, and that screw over my gran, and that screw over my disabled mother, and screw over this person and that person, right? And I can't remember the last time, I don't think it's ever happened in my lifetime, where a Prime Minister has taken the podium outside Number 10 and made a really impassioned speech about why this country, the UK, needs migration. How migration has been good for this country, how migrants give more than they take, and how just from a pure economic perspective, the country can't survive without migration in the future. And how we benefited from migration because of the culture, because of the arts, they've contributed to academia, they've contributed to our cuisine, thank God for it, and so on. And I can't remember the last time my Prime Minister made that really impassioned plea. So look, if I was Keir Starmer, look, I don't think it's even a conversation with Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer, I can't see him lasting past May, so there's local elections in May. You can take my prediction here today that he won't survive those. I mean, I'm not sure he'll even get to those elections given the Manderson affair, but if he gets to me, he'll, the Labour will get thumped in the Welsh elections, thumped in local elections, and most likely get thumped in the Scottish elections. That's not an absolute given, of course. And I suspect he'll be out the door in May. But for his successor, forgive me, which is why Andy Burnham's so interesting. Presenting something different, I think, is going to be important and hopeful. Questions around trans ID or self ID and the gender debate. You're right about that interview. So let me be unequivocal about it. I absolutely still believe in furthering and progressing the rights of trans people, and I agree still that the process that we have when it comes to gender recognition and gaining a gender recognition certificate, as it is in Scotland and the UK, is still far too over-medicalised and invasive a process. And I would say to anybody, and there may be a range of opinions here, I would say to anybody that hasn't spoken to somebody who's trans, because I spent a lot of time during this process speaking to the trans community as much as I could to try to understand where they were coming from. I can't imagine what it's like being born in a body that you don't feel you belong in. So I have the opposite. I was born male. I feel comfortable in my body. Don't get me wrong, I can lose a little bit of fat and smaller bits and bobs, but generally dad bod, but generally, I feel comfortable in the body that I'm in. I can't imagine how difficult life must be that every time you look at yourself in the mirror, or every day, every second, every minute that you're in your body, you feel like you're in the wrong body. That must be, and I know because I've spoken to trans people, that is a horrible, depressing, quite literally depressing position to be in. And for a percentage of the population that's so small, the column inches and broadcast minutes and hours that are given to that community, punching down on that community, to me is a disgrace. But what I think we handled incorrectly, and this is kind of self-reflection because I was part of the government at the time, was for those that had fears, and genuine fears. I'm not talking about those that I think are nefarious, are using the trans community to punch down, who've got transphobia clearly seeping through every pore of their body, but those that have got genuine concerns, again, as a father of 3 girls, should my daughter be in a changing room undressing in front of somebody that has a penis, right? Somebody who's got those real fears. We didn't do enough. The beginning of this process, which we dragged out, by the way, far too long, we didn't take enough time to speak to those people and really try to understand and try to take them on the journey with us. And we didn't do enough of that. And that's to our detriment, but it's more so to the detriment of the trans community, who have now become a lightning rod for so much abuse, and we've got to accept our responsibility as the Scottish Government for not handling that process well. Last question about the rise of populism and the hatred and so on. Again, I don't want to kind of small violin for me and all that stuff, but look at the rise of social media in particular has been pretty awful, that then corresponds with the rise of hatred and abuse. So people that would normally be sitting in their mum's basement, in the Y-fronts, tune out a can, shouting at the television, have now got a platform sometimes with hundreds of thousands of millions of people, where they can spew the most inane and dreadful abuse. Thank you. Cheers. Horrific abuse, and they're given that platform because of the followers that they have and because of the content they can produce. And it's hard, and I would say this to anybody who wants to go into politics, I would always say to you, definitely do it, because we need young people in particular going into politics, and not so young people, but people with different ideas going into politics. But go in with your eyes wide open, that you're going to come across a level, I'm afraid, of abuse that our predecessors never had to handle. And that will question your integrity, your character, they'll make up lies about you. And as First Minister, that was really tough. Not so much me, but when your family gets involved. So my eldest daughter was 14 at the time. And I just remember, because of the abuse that we were getting and death threats we were getting, particularly after Elon Musk, he came after me at one point. I think he called me a super racist, which was self-projection if ever I heard of it. But he made that comment, so unleashed a torrent of death threats and rape threats towards my wife and family, and just horrible stuff. The police then did a review of our security and they installed a safe room in the house. And it's a horrible conversation that I had to have with my eldest, who was 14 at the time, to say, look, at that point I only had 2 children. I've now got 3. I've got a 1-year-old. At that point I had 2 children. And I had a conversation with my 14-year-old to say, look, God forbid, if you ever hear the alarm go off in the middle of the night, the house alarm, your responsibility is to get your little sister. They sleep on the same side of the house. You get your little sister, you run into that safe room. Doesn't matter where me or your mum are. You run into that safe room. This is how you lock it, and this is how you press the panic alarm. And you wait in that safe room. You do not leave that safe room. You do not open it, even if I'm banging on the door. You secure your sister, who's only 4 years old. You get her, and you get in that safe room. And that's the kind of conversation you shouldn't have to have with your 14-year-old daughter. But you have to have it. You have to give her the GPS located alarm just in case, she's walking to school and she spots something suspicious. So, look, it's hard and it's difficult, but we have to go in eyes wide open.
With that, I'd like to bring this event to a close.
Are we being chucked out? Wonderful.
With that, we'd like to bring this event to a close. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and applause for Humza. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.